but thank you for joining us for recognizing and preventing financial fraud. Karen and I were just talking before we got started, and I've had some issues with my credit card and stuff, so I'll be paying attention too today. Um, but I'm Jamie, the Adult Program Coordinator at the Deerfield Public Library, and I'd like to welcome our presenter, Karen Chan. Karen holds a master's degree in family and consumption economics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She is a member of the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, the Financial Planning Association, and the Family Economics Resource Management Association. If you have a question, you can put that in the chat at any time. Karen will be answering those questions near the end of the program, but feel free to put those in at any time. I will be monitoring that through the duration of the program too. So if you have a question for me, you can feel free to put that in there. And if you have anyone joining you on your device, you can let us know how many. That gives us a more accurate count of attendance. Okay, so if we don't have any urgent questions right now, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Give me just a moment while I start sharing my screen here. And then one more moment while I get my presenter screen up. All right, we're good to go. So pleasure having everybody today. Unfortunately, this topic has become, I think, even more timely than I expected when I started working on it last year. So I have some stories to tell you that have happened since the pandemic started, and I think you'll learn a few things today. Jamie already gave me a nice introduction. I'll just say that doing personal finance education is what I have spent my professional career doing, initially with University of Illinois Extension, and then for the last 9 years, I can't believe it, on my own as an independent personal finance educator. I do hold the Certified Financial Planner designation, but I don't practice. I got that training so that I could do a better job as an educator, and I am strictly education. I don't sell any financial products or services, and so my goal is to give you information that, to the best of my ability, is completely unbiased. When I started working on this last year, of course, the issue of identity theft and fraud and those sorts of problems was already huge, but I was actually taken aback when I went again to the Federal Trade Commission and looked up their 2020 data and discovered that just between 2019 and 2020, their reports of problems that fall under this umbrella rose from 3.2 million in 2019 all the way to 4.7 million last year. And out of that, a good portion, almost half, are actually frauds. 34% of those had a loss. And although the median loss is not huge, $311, digging a little deeper provides some interesting insights in that. Most of us have probably been taught that it's older adults who are more susceptible, more targeted by fraud. And yet it's the younger people who reported losing money most often, the age 20 to 29 group. On the other hand, older adults, 70 and over, when they had a loss, the amount of the loss was significantly higher than for other age groups. And so that does begin to give us a sense of the ways in which we are taken advantage of. Now, the top problems that were reported by the Federal Trade Commission, number one is identity theft. And this includes, among other things, people applying for government benefits such as unemployment insurance in your name, which has been one of the huge areas that we see reported since the pandemic began with large job losses. This has just become a huge area of scam. Imposter scams aren't as big a proportion as they have been, but they're still the number two reported problem. And this includes both somebody who's impersonating an authority like a government official or from Social Security or the bank, but also romantic scams, the relatives in distress phone calls, and the tech support scams, that pop up on your screen. You have a virus, you need to get in touch with us and pay us this money to take care of that. And these types of scams, about a fourth of the people who reported them had lost money, adding up to $1.2 billion. So there is a lot at stake here as a nation in terms of the amount of money that is being lost. And the reason is that truly fraud can happen to anyone. None of us is immune. And I'm going to give you a few examples. I have a young friend. She's 14 now, 13 when this happened. Like a lot of younger folks, she's big into online games. And in a game that she was playing, she had won or earned or acquired this very special thing. And it was literally a glowing skateboard. I mean, a virtual, glowing skateboard. That's what it was. It was no longer available. And so it was a highly prized thing, and people would trade for stuff. Somebody was interested in perhaps trading, wanted to see this thing, and apparently the only way for them to see it was for her to actually give them access, and they stole it. And so she lost her highly valued glowing skateboard through a scam within the game. An older adult friend of mine in his 70s logs into his computer one day and has this beautiful message saying, "We have encrypted all the data on your computer. If you want it back, pay us this money." They picked the wrong person in this case because he uses that computer to stream live symphonies and so forth from Germany and what have you. He's had no data stored on there, so they got no money from him. But think about if it had been you. How much of your life resides on your computer, and how much would you have been willing to pay in order to retrieve that data? And then the telephone grandparent scams. "Grandma, Tony, is that you?" "Yeah, I'm in Miami. It's spring break." "Well, I thought you weren't going anywhere this year." "Well, Mom told me not to, but I came anyway and everything got stolen. I need money to get back to school before I'm expelled. Please, you've got to wire me money, and you can't tell Mom." This has it all covered, right? Urgency, why nobody else can know, why there's this urgent need for money. In my sister's husband's family, there was an older woman who was apparently renowned for her astuteness. She got taken on this scam to the tune of $10,000. I give her credit because she didn't hide it. She told everybody what had happened, trying to educate other people. Can you imagine losing $10,000? And then the situation where you get a call from your HR department and they ask, "Can you tell us why you applied for unemployment insurance when you're still working here?" Well, obviously it wasn't her. It was somebody who impersonated her. One of the ways that people find out that happened is if their HR department contacts them, or you get one of these little debit cards in the mail or some other indication from the state of Illinois that they have been paying you benefits. The fact of the matter is that fraudsters have a really sophisticated toolbox. Nowadays, they are able to gather personal information from so many sources. I mean, there are websites that are perfectly legal that contain a lot of information about us. And then you add to it the information that we somewhat naively sometimes give them through games on Facebook and surveys that are just cons in disguise online. And then, of course, data breaches. We've all probably had some of our information taken through those. And that information, along with a lot of this other stuff, eventually gets onto the dark web, where people begin to match up information about a particular individual until they can do a lot of damage. Paired with that, they may be presenting themselves as representing legitimate organizations. And there are a lot of ways they do that. One of them is by spoofing a legitimate phone number. Spoofing means that if you have caller ID, it will show up to be the police department, the IRS, your congressman's office, whatever. When it's not, of course, it's a fraud behind it. I was particularly ticked off, and I became one of those reports to the FTC when somebody spoofed my local hospital's phone number and I answered. And I was like, you can act like you're a neighbor's phone number, you can act like you're anybody, but don't you dare act like you are the hospital's phone number. And so I was one of those reports that went in. They, of course, also put up fraudulent versions of real websites. That's what you'll often be taken to if you get the emails that purport to be from a business or company or what have you that you need to, they say you need to reach out to. They'll create email addresses that, since you don't normally correspond with these groups, you don't really perhaps realize that it's not the real email address. And so you put together all the information that they gather about us, the ways that they impersonate others, and they can really fool almost anyone. And they keep adapting too. During the pandemic, even if you hadn't ever done any online shopping before, I can almost guarantee that you have now. And many of us have done enough shopping online that you might not have realized if one individual thing hadn't shown up. And so if you got a text message like this, that there's an important notification about your package, you might, as my friend who shared this with me, wonder, is there one that didn't show up? Sure enough, she was smart enough to not click and figure out otherwise, but she was almost taken by this. And one of the reasons that fraud works and people continue to do it now is because there's a very low cost to reach massive numbers of people because of today's technology. It's also effective because they've got the psychology down pat. They know, like in the grandparent scam, they know how to trigger emotional reactions that override our logical brain, and we react before we even really reflect and figure it out. They also appear to emotions, some of which we don't like to admit that we have, but we do. They appeal to greed, they appeal to fear. They also play on our respect for authority and our training to, go along in those situations. Of course, they're pros at this. They do it 24/7 when we probably only encounter it once in a great while. And with some of the frauds today, your money could be gone before you even know anything has happened. The good news is that we do have our own toolbox. And so today, that's what we're going to focus on, is what things we can use to either protect ourselves from being victims, avoid being victims, learn how to recognize and disengage if we realize we are being contacted by someone that's probably not who they say, and then how to report it and how to get help in the end. So as far as protecting, here my definition of protecting is reducing the likelihood of damage should a fraud or scam occur, and reducing the amount of damage. Two things that are, if any of you have worked in the insurance field, these are two standard risk management strategies. So as far as protecting, how do we protect ourselves? So much fraud today that takes place occurs through some form of technology, whether it's your computer, your tablet, your phone, the router on your Wi-Fi. All of those need to be updated regularly. Operating systems need to be updated whenever you're prompted to do so. The applications that you're using also need to be updated. Hopefully you have your settings set to tell you when they need to be updated rather than relying on you to go and check. And on top of that, you should also have, of course, antivirus or other security programs that are operating on not just your computer, but also your phone, your tablet. Don't think there's any of those apps for routers at this point. Another way to protect yourself is setting up alerts on your financial accounts so that something goes awry, you'll know perhaps before the transaction is completed, but for sure before that initial test transaction has happened and they start to use it more aggressively. Back in the day when things are a little bit more hands-on, but may still be, in the old days, if your wallet got stolen, the first thing they would do with your credit card is do some little innocuous thing like run it through a gas pump. They might not even pump any gas, but they would find out whether it was a live card or not, and whether that number was worth money that they could go and sell it online, knowing that it was a live card. Deleting online accounts that you no longer use is another way of protecting yourself, so that there's less data out there to be hacked. And backing up your information is another way of reducing the damage that can occur. Think about that ransomware example. But because of the way ransomware works, you don't just want to have a backup of your data. You want to have a backup that isn't routinely connected to your computer, because if it is, it could likely be encrypted as well. So you want a backup that you do the backup and then you take it offline. You can also use encryption on your devices. I manage all my financial stuff in Quicken, and that database has tons of stuff. Now, the passwords are all encrypted in that vault, but nonetheless, encryption is something that we have access to now for either files or entire devices. Consumer Reports just wrote about this in last month's issue, in the February 2021 issue. And this particular reference is on page 33. It talks about how to do encryption either on a Mac or on a PC. And I just verified with Jamie before we started the program that the Deerfield Library does have virtual access for its patrons to Consumer Reports, and you would access it through the database part of the online services of the library. Now, if you're patron of another library, odds are that yours also has this online subscription to Consumer Reports. You might need to just ask them how to access it. Now, the golden standard in protecting ourselves is through passwords. Unfortunately, most of us don't use them to their best effect. Passwords should be unique. They should be difficult, and they should be long. Unfortunately, that also means that you probably can't remember them. So there's it's not new at this point, but there is a specialized app out there that works as a password manager. Now, there are a lot of varieties of here. There are a lot of creators of password managers, but they all share similar, they all do similar things. In addition to being a vault where you can securely store all of your logins and passwords, when you're on a web page that you've previously set up login information for, the password manager will very likely be able to autofill those fields, which means that you aren't manually typing it in, which means that even if you have a piece of malware called a keystroke logger, they won't be able to capture the information because you didn't physically type it on your keyboard. Password managers can also generate passwords for you that meet whatever the criteria are, and they will generate difficult passwords that are unique. And again, Consumer Reports periodically does reviews of password managers, and this link will take you to the one that I think is most recent, although they do this often enough that there could be a newer one that's come out since then. There are other places you can read reviews of passwords as well. PC Magazine online does it on a regular basis. And it helps sometimes to read a couple of different reviews to see which features match best with how you would use it. Now, there's another thing that can almost serve as your password manager, but it's something that I would not do initially because I thought it was putting me at higher risk. When you set up an account at a new page, you'll often be prompted with something like this. Would you like to use your login for Facebook, Microsoft, Google to get into this account? Well, it'd be nice because then I don't have to create another login and password, but I didn't understand how they worked. I thought this was going to give whoever this website was, let's say I'm looking at grandmaspecanpies.com. I thought it would give grandmaspecanpies.com access to my Facebook login or my Google login. Turns out I was wrong, and this is actually sometimes a smart way to handle things. What happens is the new site doesn't see the login for, and MGF stands for Microsoft, Google, Facebook. What happens is that If you aren't currently already logged in to Microsoft or Google or Facebook, you will be sent there to log in, and then they will send a token back to, in this case, Grandma's Pecan Pies, verifying who you are, but they get no personally identifiable information. They get nothing that that a hacker could use. And the other nice thing is that, let's say you ordered that pie and it really wasn't any good. You're never going to order anything again from this website. And now you need to go cancel your account if you're going to play things safe. Well, you know, this is a mom and pop shop. They may not even really have a way for you to close your account. If you had set it up to use one of your other master accounts as the login, you would simply go to Google, Facebook, whichever, and revoke access to Grandma's Pecan Pies. No need to have to actually close an account because you never set up an individual login there. You can kick it up another notch, as Emeril Lagasse used to say, and maybe still does, by using not just a password, but using two-factor authentication, where you will have to supply a piece of information in addition to the password in order to get in. The earlier versions of this would ask you to answer a security question that you had previously provided the answer for. The problem is that some of those things are now very available information. I'm sorry, don't use your mother's maiden name. That's probably been hacked, you know, a bunch of times already, or they can go into a genealogy site and figure it out. Also, people who know you may be able to figure that out. So two-factor authentication today usually means you sign up after being prompted, perhaps by a message like what I've shown here. You agree to the two-factor authentication and you provide probably both a phone number and an email address to which they can send a code when you try to log in, and you'll have to provide that code as well as the password before you'll be allowed in. Initially, it increases the hassle factor of logging in just a bit, but you can also tell it when you're logging in from a trusted device like your own laptop, your own phone, and they will not prompt you again for the second factor when you log into those until you erase cookies, and then you're likely to be prompted again. But if I'm at my sister's house and I want to log into my bank account for some reason, that's not a trusted device that I've told them is okay. I will have to do the two-factor authentication there. You really want to use these for financial accounts, but also, in my opinion, for any social media accounts that you use, because those can be used as master passwords, master logins for other sites, and because we share so much information on those. You really don't want them to be hacked. All right, so next step, how do we simply avoid coming in contact with people who want to scam or defraud us? Well, through email, if you get those scam types of messages that you know it's not somebody you've ever done business with, you may typically have unsubscribed, either ignored them or unsubscribed. Well, ignoring them is okay, but it doesn't stop anything from happening in the future. Unsubscribing could actually be a mistake, because then you've told that scammer that this is a live email address. Somebody actually checks this email address, and now they may sell that email address to other scammers, and now you've just created a bigger snowball problem. So the better issue at this point is report the email as spam or junk to your email provider. Sometimes that's as easy as right-clicking on the message and selecting spam or junk. That will not only remove that particular message from your account, but it probably means that you won't see messages from that sender again. When we're talking about phones, whether it's landline or cell phones, today using caller ID to screen calls is just a fact of life, because I don't know about you, but I'm not sure. 80 to 90% of the calls we get are probably calls we don't want. Caller ID can help with that, but as we talked about spoofing numbers, even if it says it's an entity that you should trust, you shouldn't believe it. So if the caller ID says it's from the hospital, like the one that I actually answered, if they ask for personal information on that call, don't give it. Instead, hang up, call the hospital or whoever it is on a phone number you know to be legitimate. Find out if they were looking for that information. Take care of the issue if there was one. You can also go old school on this as far as your landline. You can use an answering machine that's one of those old ones where you record your message, and when somebody calls, you not only hear your message play, but you hear the recording start. And you can decide at that point, is this somebody you want to speak with? And if so, you try to grab the grab the phone and answer it before that individual hung up. You can also use blocking services that try to weed out the robocalls so that they don't come through to you. One example of that is Nomo Robo. Which ones you have access to or are compatible depend on the exact provider of your phone service, but you may be able to use it both on cell phones and on landlines. Of course, social media is a whole nother thing as far as the likelihood of encountering fraudsters and having data taken from you. I actually went through a brief period while into the pandemic where I was getting friend requests that, okay, they were the picture and the profile were good looking men that if I were a cougar, I might be interested in, and who had beautiful resumes. I mean, these were impressive professional people. I think there was a very clear pattern there. These were not real individuals. I don't accept links from people I don't know. But knowing that it could very well be a fraud, I did poke around and look at their profiles, and I think I verified there was a pattern here. Someone was trying to get me to link with them for whatever nefarious purposes. You can't really control friend requests too much with privacy settings, but privacy settings are very valuable because they let you limit who sees any information you post and also the information in your profile. For example, number one, my birth date, unless it was required to set up an account, does not appear. And if I did have to provide my birth date, it's limited so that only the host of the social media can see it, nobody else can, things like that. And when you post stuff on there, don't reveal personal information there either. I have a cat. He's walking around here somewhere. I thought he was going to pay us a visit. I may talk about him. I might even post a picture, but I never use his name. I also never reference my spouse's name or any other individual names, other than if I'm, doing, calling somebody out in the in a post. And above all, avoid these surveys or fun things that come around periodically, particularly on Facebook, where they do seem fun, but think about it. This is one that a friend of mine responded to about a year ago, asking her to post the picture of the exact cars that she had owned throughout her life, make, model, and color. Well, honey, I had to reach out to her and say, friend, I appreciate that you're having fun, but do you realize that this kind of information is often the answer to the security questions you're asked to do things like set up your My account with Social Security or to set up online access to a new bank account. This is the kind of information you really don't want out there. Web searching, I think most of us are pretty savvy about this at this point, but you want to make sure the web searches, the sites that you're going to, not just for purchases, but just going to look at, are legit. If you have antivirus software on your computer, you may have a feature you can turn on where it will flag websites like this green checkbox over on the side here, telling me that this is a verified account. I can trust it, as opposed to a caution signal or a stop sign telling me that this is either questionable or bad, and I really don't want to go there. And then what you probably already knew as far as checking to see that the site is secure, especially if you're going to input information for a purchase or anything like that. You look for a closed padlock. It will look slightly different depending on your browser. And yes, look for HTTPS. The S tells you that it is secure, but nowadays, often, unless you hover over the URL, you won't even see that portion of the URL. And so it's easier nowadays just to look for the closed padlock. And with online purchases, of course, you can be most assured if you're shopping with an online provider that you're already familiar with. Maybe you've already used them before. But one way to play it a little extra safe is to, rather than inputting your real credit card number, either use a PayPal account, or if your credit card is one that will issue special numbers for one-time use, that's also another workaround. Takes just a little bit more effort. If you're given the option to say to whether to save your credit card information in that seller's database, decline. I'm sorry, I think it's well worth the extra effort of entering that credit card number again if you ever do go back there to make a purchase. And if you have a password manager, you may be able to have it autofill your credit card information anyway, saving you the trouble, but doing it securely. Credit cards do provide you better protection in all situations, but particularly online purchases as opposed to a debit card. You have stronger protections, and during the time it might take to get a fraudulent charge or debit corrected, the impact on you will be less. With a credit card, you simply aren't held responsible on a disputed charge until it's resolved. With a debit card, the money's already going to be gone out of your account, and you won't have use of that money until it's resolved and you get the money back. And of course, look for that secure connection before making an online purchase. Another way to avoid coming in contact with scams and frauds is to limit how people are able to access your credit information with the 3 major credit reporting agencies. You can today freeze and unfreeze or do temporary thaws on your accounts for free. This became free nationwide about 2.5 years ago. When you freeze your credit report, it means that no data is going to be released to new creditors who you don't already have a relationship with. Current ones, like let's say you already have a Citibank credit card. Citibank is still going to be able to check your credit report and make sure that you still look as good of a credit risk as you did a year ago when you opened the account. But basically, no new accounts are going to get opened in your name because new creditors can't get in and can't get a report or a score on you. With freezes, you do have to notify each of the 3 credit reporting agencies individually. Something else, though, that you can do is put a fraud alert on them. Now, with fraud alerts, you only have to notify one of the agencies, and by law, they must send the information to the other 2, and those fraud alerts will appear automatically. You can do a 1-year initial fraud alert just because you want to. But if you've actually been a victim of identity theft, you can provide that documentation and have a 7-year extended fraud alert put on your accounts, on your credit reports. What those require is that if a company gets a request for credit or what have you, they will have to take an additional step to try to verify that it really is you who has filed the application. The same law that made freezing and unfreezing free also required the credit reporting agencies to establish dedicated websites and phone numbers where you can do both of these things, the freezing, the unfreezing, and the fraud alerts. And so I've given you that information here on the slide. One thing that you'll be happy to know about is that freezing and unfreezing now is generally going to happen in real time. You will likely be able to download an app for each of these credit bureaus to your phone. You'll be able to unfreeze it, for example, when you're sitting across from the finance desk at the car dealership where you're buying a new car. And as soon as you've been approved for the loan, you can freeze it right back virtually in real time. Now, how about ways to recognize and step away from potential frauds? There are red flags that by themselves don't guarantee that you're encountering a fraud, but they tell you it's much more likely. If anybody asks you to make a payment using cryptocurrency, now the most famous one is Bitcoin, but there are lots of others. But someone requesting you to pay them via Bitcoin or a wire transfer or prepaid debit cards that they want you to go purchase, load money onto, and send to them, or give them the numbers for. Same thing with a gift card. Those are all red flags that tell you this transaction, they're trying to fly under the radar. And that's indicating that something quite not on the level is going on here. Also beware of generic messages or emails that you get perhaps from people you really do know, or they appear to be from people you really do know, but particularly be leery if there are attachments or links in these. You know, for quite a while, it seemed like a regular thing that I had friends getting hacked, getting their Facebook accounts hacked, and I would get a new friend request from them. This actually was a hacker asking, and I'd look at that and think, I'm pretty sure I'm already friended with them. And so I would ignore it. But sometimes it would also be a message from them, usually something generic like, hey, Karen, how you doing? Thought you might like to see this. But this is somebody I haven't heard from in 3 or 4 years directly. Why would they send something so generic to me at this point? Those are all tip-offs. Also, when you're actually talking with or interacting with a live person, if you're being threatened, of course, that can happen without it being a live person too. Threats come via email. If there's intimidation involved or high pressure, if somebody's making statements like your social security payments are going to stop, or you're going to get arrested, or we're going to freeze your account, those are all attempts to unnerve you enough that, again, your logical brain won't engage, and instead your emotional brain will take over, and you won't use as sound of a judgment as you would without these threats. So those are all red flags of possible scams and frauds. And when they tell you it's a secret, you've been specially selected. These are all techniques to make you feel special and to make sure that you won't tell anyone. So when you see any of these things, if it's on the phone, hang up. If it's on a website, close the link, close the browser. If it's an email, ignore it or report it as spam. If it's something that came in the mail, just toss it out. If it's through social media, just unfriend or delete that, that friend request. Just prevent them having any reason to think that they should reach out to you again, that they might be successful next time. And if you have engaged with a fraudster, you may not know it yet, but if you've engaged with something through any of these sources, maybe it had one of these red flags, but they convinced you it was legit, and you perhaps go to the bank to withdraw money, or you go to the place where you can where you can wire money, even, you know, to the drop-off places for UPS, you know, where you're doing something there. There was a survey done by the Better Business Bureau as part of their scam tracker program. And they found that of those who reported scams, 20% said that someone tried to intervene and stop them doing what they had been told to do to stop them from losing money. And they specifically named people like bank tellers, cashiers, and wire transfer agents. But only half of the people who had someone try to intervene listened. That half avoided losing money. The half who didn't listen still lost money because they ignored the cautions being brought up by the people that they were interacting with. But be aware that scammers know that this will happen, and they will often coach you how to avoid somebody knowing what you're doing, or how to react if somebody questions what's going on. But let this particular piece of information help you remember, if you ever do find yourself in that situation, listen to the people who are trying to help. Now, what if the worst case happens? You got taken, or maybe you didn't get taken, but you're pretty sure you did encounter something that was fraudulent. What do you do? Well, first and foremost, document everything. Take screenshots, write down names, dates, and conversations. Maybe you let's say that, like I said, something happened where you either were taken, We're almost taken, but you've got some information about how this stuff is being perpetrated today. Please go to identitytheft.gov. This is where the data came from that I shared with you at the beginning. It's interactive. It's not a live person, but it is interactive. You'll answer questions about what happened. The benefit that you will get is they will give you a recovery plan. In other words, things that you can do to minimize the damage that might happen as a result of this based on exactly what you told them. You'll be able to print a report of what you entered, which can help you if you need to file a police report or prove to a bank or some other authority that you've been a victim. And you'll be able to print your recovery plan. If you create an account, they will help you keep track of what you have done so far and what remains to be done. They'll help you pre-fill some forms that you might need or print letters that you could use to notify, like I said, banks or others. It might include instructions of how to freeze credit reports, how to approach the companies whose accounts have been affected, how to freeze those accounts, change logins, and all sorts of other things. Replacing a government ID is not commonly needed, but another one of my friends had someone, this was a bizarre one. He's a well-known scientist. I won't name the exact field. He is highly regarded and often requested to be like a keynote presenter at international conferences. Somebody actually set up a fake conference saying that he was organizing it and you could register and the whole 9 yards, and someone had gotten a fraudulent passport with his information. So it was quite an involved thing. You know, he had to work with whoever to get the website shut down. He had to get his passport reissued. It was a pretty bizarre situation and an interesting one. Now, if you don't want to provide information to the FTC about what may have happened to you, you can still access a lot of the information about things that you should do in various situations. It's going to be checklists that are publicly available to anyone. And so that will be your alternative. And if perchance you or someone you know has found out that their identity has been used to claim unemployment benefits here in the state of Illinois, these are the two web pages for the Illinois Department of Employment Security that you may need. The first one is the page where you would actually report the problem. And the second one is giving you some tips about how can you spot it. What should you do if you've actually, received a debit card or gotten a letter from IDES about this? Like I said, unfortunately, this has been a very predominant form of ID theft over the past year. And Illinois is not alone. California and other states have been targeted really heavily as well. Now, something new that I found just last week when I was checking through this presentation to make sure I had everything as updated as possible, and once again, from one of my favorite providers, Consumer Reports, they have developed, they obtained from Toronto University a tool that they had developed to give you personalized guidance about the things that you're concerned about regarding frauds and identity theft. And you get to it by, this does not require a membership. And so you don't, if you don't have a Consumer Reports online membership, you won't need to go through the library to do this one. You just go to securityplanner.consumerreports.org. The first step asks you to tell them all of the devices that you use, including things like these doorbells and things like that. The second step is telling them what your main concerns are. Is it protecting data if your devices are stolen? Is it avoiding phishing? What is it? And you'll probably be like me. There'll be multiple ones that are areas that you would like to pay attention to. And then finally, a couple of last statements. You'll be asked to say which, if any of these, are things that that you want them to include in creating your plan. And then you get your results. It'll be a prioritized list of steps that they advise you to take. For me, enabling multi-factor authentication turned out to be one of the top ones. I didn't, obviously they don't know I already have a password manager, so that was one of the top recommendations as well. But this gives you a very actionable list because, as you see, they also tell you whether there's a cost to the thing that they're suggesting that you do, tells you how much effort it will take, and then a place to click just to learn more about it, so that you can actually start taking the steps right away. I thought this was very well designed, easy to use. I think it would be a good resource for any and everyone to go to make sure that you've done what you should be doing to protect ourselves, since these things are simply becoming just more and more common. And finally, I want to wrap up with a story of yet another friend of mine. The most extensive situation of identity theft that I personally know of. And I asked her if she would give me an avatar that I could use of her so that it would feel even more personal. Well, she did better than that. She gave me her avatar, but she also depicted exactly how she felt. This is what she sent me. This is not happening, is how she was feeling. So what did happen? Monday morning, relatively early, she gets a phone call from her financial advisor where her retirement accounts are held, and maybe an investment account as well. I didn't ask her for those kinds of details. She gets a phone call from the financial advisor saying, and I'm going to call her Maria, even though that's not her name. Maria, did you initiate a transfer out of this account to a bank in Kansas? No, don't have a bank in Kansas. Why? Well, there's a transaction here waiting to process. No, not me. Okay. Now, this financial advisor uses a third party to custody the accounts. That's actually that's a best practice, because that means that your financial advisor is less likely to be trying to perpetrate a scam themselves on you. But what that meant was he needed to get the custodian, in this case, it was Schwab. They needed to get the custodian online so that they could get the custodian to stop this. So three-way phone call going on. She's verifying who she is. She's verifying that she didn't request this transaction. And just as Schwab is canceling the transaction, and they have to do that before they could close the account or freeze the account, just as they're getting it, that transaction terminated, another request comes in. And again, just as they're getting that taken care of, a couple of more requests come in. And so they were like chasing their tails, trying to keep up with canceling these requested fraudulent transactions so that they could close the account. And my friend laughed and she said, apparently the fraudster had to go to the bathroom because there was this momentary lapse where there wasn't a new request coming in and they were finally able to lock down the account. So of course, I'm sure all three people are like wiping their brows going, oh my gosh, I'm glad that's over with. And so of course the account is frozen and they took whatever steps needed to be done there. And so she gets off the phone thinking, oh my gosh, we really dodged a bullet, because it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to recoup any of that money if it had actually been taken, unless they were and we'll get into that, what kinds of protections you have in a minute. Later in the day, though, she gets a text notification from her bank about a transaction. And again, it's not a transaction that she initiated. So she gets in touch with the bank by phone. Now, mind you, this is early on in the pandemic. This is when we were under like total lockdown here in Illinois. But the bank says they need her to come in person. So she has to go, through this rigmarole to get in the door because it's locked and they only let you in. Somebody has to come and personally escort you in and stuff. And so they're going through the same kinds of stuff, verifying which transactions were hers, which ones were not, trying to get those reversed or canceled, or at least put them under investigation, closing down the account, moving her money somewhere else, which means that any automatic debits and payments that you have going through have to be redone. And so quite a bit of work to be done in this situation. I think that something similar happened with yet another of her accounts. I can't remember right now. Was it a different bank account? Was it a credit card? But something else popped up that seemed not kosher. And so at this point, she's like proactively reaching out to every place that she has an account, trying to beef up the privacy, making sure that no fraudulent transactions are going to happen. And of course, her head is spinning just the way she portrayed here with her avatar. It's like, just what the heck is going on? She's spent hours now dealing with this. And then another day or so later, she gets a email or a letter from Walmart saying that her request for a credit card has been denied because her credit report is frozen. Well, that was the last thing that happened to her. Although I will tell you that the epilogue is next week, they started attacking her husband in the same way. So what can we learn from this? Well, first of all, how did it happen? Nobody knows for sure. She did hear some possibilities mentioned by each of the financial institutions that she dealt with. It's very possible that this was a result of a data breach, where perhaps multiple data breaches where more than just one set of information on her was obtained, and that information eventually being sold on the dark web, where it could again be paired with other possibly legitimate information about her. Maybe some of it came from her having downloaded that malware that I mentioned earlier, where it tracks your keystrokes and it saves your login and passwords for the websites that you go to, or when she logged into her email or to Facebook. Maybe without realizing it, she actually did click on a link in a phishing scam, phishing email that captured her login information for a particular website. Or could have been done the old-fashioned way. Maybe there is someone who had been in her house with physical access to the computer and therefore access to some of this information. Now, I give my friend credit. She, I think, was very upfront with me about this next set of information. What made it worse? She admitted she uses simple passwords. She uses duplicate passwords across multiple accounts. She has been known to allow her browser and websites to save passwords. And when we talked through this, she said, "I admit to being stupid and lazy." But she also did some good things. She already had alerts set up on her checking account. She had already frozen her credit reports. If not, that Walmart credit card would have been issued, and I'm sure every dollar of credit line would have been used within a few hours to buy things. She had an advisor who was a responsible person who apparently checks his clients' accounts every morning, or at least every Monday morning, and reached out as soon as he saw something that didn't look normal. She also responded quickly and diligently herself. She proactively contacted accounts that hadn't yet been compromised. She worked with places to freeze accounts and take other steps to lock things down. So in the end, this is the good news. No money was lost. This is kind of like, no animals were harmed in the filming of this movie. No money was lost, but she spent, I think she estimated, more than 40 hours working on this. And this is something that doesn't appear on a slide, but I'll take this opportunity to use this as an example of why paying for identity theft protection and insurance probably won't take care of the real problem. They say, they will reimburse you for all of your losses up to a certain amount and so forth. Well, in this case, there weren't any monetary losses, but she lost a ton of time. And that's one of the reasons that buying some of the types of services where they say that they will monitor for you, they will alert you, of the things that they see. Typically, they're only finding information after something's happened anyway. Whereas my focus today, I've tried to make it on what can you do that's more preventative instead of just identifying it after the fact. And so let me just quickly go through what protections she did have if money had been lost. On an existing credit card, federal law requires that your maximum liability be $50 per card for fraudulent transactions, zero if you report a problem with the card before it's actually used fraudulently. But most card issuers today, every card issuer that I'm aware of, goes beyond the federal guidelines and says that they will give you $0 of liability, regardless of whether you have detected problems before a charge has actually been made. Your protections, as I said earlier, are not as strong with ATM or debit cards. Now their protection comes in two pieces, lost or stolen versus the number having been compromised. If the card itself was lost or stolen, federal protection is $0 if it's reported before it's actually been used, $50 if it's reported within 2 business days after you learn of the loss or the theft, but $500 if you don't report it until more than 2 days after, and your liability is theoretically at least unlimited if you don't notice or report anything until after 60 days after the statement containing those charges was sent. So you can see why I'm saying credit cards give you better protection. What in the case of this new credit card that somebody tried to open in Maria's name? Those are governed by state law. I was actually surprised to learn this. Usually there's a $0 liability there, but it's covered differently from a fraudulent charge on an existing account. And then let's talk about the investment and retirement accounts, talk about getting us where it will really hurt. There is no federal law that protects us in these cases. Our protection really boils down to the custodian of the account or the plan sponsor if it's like an employer retirement plan. So you may want to look at those policies. You may see that they will cover you for 100% of loss, but maybe there are some criteria that you have to meet, some hurdles you have to go over. You may have to have taken certain precautions with your account, maybe such as using multi-factor authentication. So where the bulk of your assets reside, I would encourage you to check the policies there and make sure that you're doing everything you should be doing just to be safe, but also to qualify for whatever protection would be provided there. So we've covered protection, we've covered avoidance, we've covered recognizing and disengaging, we've covered reporting and getting guidance. Hopefully some portion of that was helpful to you. And so now let's go back to Jamie at the library, or probably at home, but representing the library, to see what questions you've been posting as we go along here.
Hi, Karen. Thanks. This was great. Hopefully this program will help prevent some headaches and save a lot of time. I think it will. We do have a couple of questions. What is the risk of having your personal information on sites like My Life, People Finders, etc.? And what are your thoughts on requesting removal or using a company that will remove your information from most of these sites?
Okay, and although I don't recognize the specific sites that you've mentioned, I'm pretty sure that you're talking about those sites that I mentioned earlier on who exist legally, and it's not illegal for them to be having a lot of your private information that is available typically for purchase. I debated when I revised this program, I debated whether to talk about trying to remove your data from them. In the end, I didn't put it in the presentation for two reasons. One, because, for example, that article from Consumer Reports that just talked about encryption, it talked about this. It gave some case studies. And the problem is, there aren't really a blue million, but it feels like there are a blue million of these sites that have collected your personal data and make it available for sale. It is very difficult and time consuming to request them to take it down. And even if you get it taken down now, it doesn't mean that they're not going to just harvest new information about you or the same information again and then post it again. So it seems like whack-a-mole, that the likelihood of you really getting it under control is quite unlikely. Now, I haven't specifically investigated hiring a company to do this for you. It's something that I would think is worth looking into. But I would also be curious, how successful are they actually? And it's not going to be a one-time thing. We know that for sure. That would have to be an ongoing thing because the information is just going to keep coming back. So, would it be nice? Would it be a good idea to either yourself or through somebody else to get this information removed? Yes. Is it practical and worth the effort? I think the verdict is kind of out on that. So yeah, I'm glad you asked, but that's kind of where I am. I'm just not sure. The other things that I included today, I think hands down are worth the effort and will reap benefits. I'm not quite so sure about how to deal with these sites that post information about us. Good question though. Thank you.
Okay. So our next question is, if you freeze your credit reports, will that also stop any credit monitoring service extended to you from a company's data breach?
Okay. I've had a lot of other questions about what it stops, but I don't think I've ever had that one. I'm going to guess that it does, because another example of something that cannot get in there is if your homeowners or auto insurance uses your credit history or score as part of your premium determination, they will not be able to access it. And so you may need to periodically unfreeze, find out when they do that checking and unfreeze it so that you won't get a notice that your premium went up because they couldn't find a good credit history for you anymore. I haven't heard for sure about this one, but I'm going to say no, probably. But let's think about which is more valuable, freezing or having credit monitoring. If the goal is prevention, so let's go back to that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Credit monitoring is largely cure after the fact. They'll say that, there's been this new account showing up on your account, or something else was added, some other new information showed up on your credit reports. If they're also doing dark web monitoring, yes, they're going to say, oh, yeah, some information about you is out there on the dark web, but you can't really do anything about it other than the things that we've already discussed. Hard passwords, unique passwords, unique being the important thing here if data has been breached. And of course, updating passwords on accounts that maybe have been breached. So I think the question is freezing more helpful, or is the credit monitoring more helpful? The freezing is going to be more effective at preventing theft, identity theft, I think. The monitoring might still be useful, even though freeze is in place, because if they are doing things like the dark web monitoring that doesn't stop the data getting out there, but at least it may give you a heads up what data is out there that you want to go and change. So, as you can tell, I'm kind of thinking through this. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, but I will just say this. In previous articles by Consumer Reports that I didn't cite here, they have taken the position that credit monitoring services that you must pay for really are not worth the money because you can do as much or more than they can. However, they also said that if you were offered free credit monitoring because of a data breach, that they recommended that you do take it, even though they don't think it's worth paying for. It's certainly another tool in your toolbox. So I guess you have two choices: either to go ahead and freeze and let the credit monitoring do what it can going forward, or wait until the credit monitoring expires, because typically they only last for a year or at most 2, and make sure that you freeze your credit reports at that point. Again, kind of a long answer to what may have looked like a simple question.
That's great. And Stephanie is asking, does LifeLock work?
I didn't call names, but they are the type of service I was talking about, that generally they find stuff that's already happened rather than preventing things from happening. And although I haven't looked at their the things that they cover. Initially, at least, their focus was on reimbursing actual fraudulent money lost through frauds rather than taking care of the inconvenience, because I mean, how can they do that? I think I remember that maybe for a person who is employed that had to take time off work, that they would consider that damages that they would cover. So I haven't been a fan of those kinds of services. However, it's not that they're a bad thing. It's just, is there a less expensive and perhaps better way to deal with it? And so that's why I gave you the tools that I did today. Nothing wrong with using it. Okay, I'm not saying that. It's just, which way do you prefer to deal with it the best you can?
Okay. And for Windows 10, do you feel Defender is good enough for antivirus software and malware bytes for malware removal? Again.
Okay, it's been a little while since I have carefully dived into that, and to be honest, I did that for my own knowledge rather than for this program. And so it's probably 2 years ago. And at that point, and I was reading reviews from places like, PC Magazine and CNET, and I don't think Consumer Reports, actually, they may have at some point in the past talked about that. At that point in time, Windows Defender was not particularly well rated. And so I chose to go with a third-party one. But these things change, every time a new version comes out. The anti-malware software that's deemed to be the best changes often from year to year. So I'll say this: Windows Defender is definitely better than nothing. All right. If you don't have something else, make sure you've got Windows Defender turned on. But at the point in time when you're making that decision, I would simply go out and read some reviews. Like I said, check and see when Consumer Reports did its most recent review of this kind of software. Do a Google search and try to look for journalistic or well-known geeky, computer-focused websites, and draw a conclusion for yourself then. And I'm sorry I haven't looked at it, in the last 6 months to a year. That's why I'm not going to say that it isn't good enough at this point, because I recognize that it may well have changed since the last time I looked at that particular question.
Okay. And so another kind of specific company question, can you recommend a password manager for Windows 10 PC and one for Android cell phone?
Okay, first of all, you'll probably only need one, because you'll want it to synchronize across both devices. The last thing you want is two separate password managers. And virtually all of the password managers that I've read anything about in recent years does that. The question may be, if they have a free version, will the free version let you use it on both platforms? And one that just changed that is LastPass. LastPass historically, was one of the top rated ones. They haven't been in the top tier like for the last year or two, but still, not bad, just not the best. But they recently changed so that their free version no longer allows to be used on multiple platforms. So you'll have to pay a fee there if you want that. There are several that are good. And again, although I did read these reviews recently, well, actually, do I still have that Consumer Reports sitting here? If you want to bear with a second, I may be able to answer that. Yeah, this is the issue that I was talking about, that just talked about encryption. Let me take a quick glance here and see if they actually did password managers in here. Okay, it's from the horse's mouth. Consumer Reports top rated options are 1Password, that's the number 1 and the word password, Keeper, and Bitwarden. And the instructions are: sign up, in most cases for a small monthly fee, download the app to your phone and computer, and start changing passwords, beginning with your most important accounts. This part could take a few hours, but you can do it over a few days if you like. And then the pro tip at the end says, your browser can save passwords for you, but your shiny new password manager will work across multiple browsers and devices, no matter which phone, tablet, or computer you use. And I haven't investigated how well the browsers protect our passwords, but my philosophy is the fewer places something is shared, the better. So this is February, this is current, so that's what I'd be looking at.
Yeah, and as Karen mentioned, consumer reports is available through our database with your library card. So
yeah, you may want to read that whole article. It's great.
So I don't see any more questions. This was really informative. And Karen will be returning to us on May 13th at 6:30 p.m. an evening program for taking distributions from retirement plans. So feel free to sign up for that. That'll be about an hour and a half. But yeah, so everyone, thank you for joining us. This program is being recorded, so I will be sending that out probably tomorrow. So if there's something you missed, there was a lot of information here, a lot of great stuff. Feel free to take a look at that recording. So yeah, well, anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. And thanks for joining us for a little lunchtime learning. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Jamie. It was great being here.
All right, bye-bye.